Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Weekly Walk. I'm your host, Joshua Ingram. It is Monday, May 3rd, year of our Lord, 2021. And this will be episode number 37. Alright, so I didn't do one last week. It was just too busy of a week, I think. I don't recall why I didn't exactly do one. I don't think I felt motivated, felt rushed for time, so I just didn't get around to it, I think. So it's been about 2 weeks, but I've really only had one topic kind of dominating my thoughts. It's ironic, too, that I was thinking about it um, 10, 12, 14 days ago, and then I ended up having a conversation with my small group about the topic, and it kind of just it became even more dominant in my thoughts. And so I'll spend the majority of the time talking about that because this one topic kind of divides into a few subtopics that I was thinking about as well. Excuse me. I got some dust on my phone here, just trying to blow that off there. But anyways, the topic I want to talk about is alcohol, and specifically the Christian and alcohol, and whether or not a Christian is permitted to drink alcohol. So this is something I've been thinking about, and I've got some pretty dogmatic ideas on, I guess you would say, some pretty blunt and, excuse me, semi-aggressive thoughts on it. And so I'll just come out and lay that out right away. I do not believe that a Christian can drink alcohol. And I would put a period on that. I don't think it's tolerable. Even to the point where I'm kind of, sketched out about kombucha or whatever it's called, with the 0.05% alcohol, or soy sauce or teriyaki sauce or whatever it is that has some alcohol in it. That kind of sketches me out too. Although, I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a gray area. Because I'm not saying I don't use soy sauce on my Chinese food. I do. When I found out there was alcohol in it, I got kind of upset about that. But it's kind of a difficult topic, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. So let me just try to summarize those thoughts, or not summarize, but let me just try to expand upon these thoughts that I have. I'll give you the bullet points, and then we'll go off of those. So first of all, there's a lot of Christians out there that think it's okay to drink alcohol. They think that a beer or two or a glass of wine, there's nothing wrong with that. And they would point out that the scriptures identify drunkenness as the sin and not consumption. They would say that as long as alcohol is done in moderation, it's okay. And they would have several arguments to back that up, several scriptures. They would talk about how in the Psalms it says that wine rejoices the heart. They would talk about how Jesus made wine at the wedding. They'll talk about how Paul told Timothy to have a glass of wine for his stomach ailments, things of that nature. And so they're convinced in their minds, and they have these scriptures to back them up. So they would say, especially the Christians I associate with, they would say drunkenness is a sin. That's very clearly defined in the scriptures. However, consumption of a drink or two, as long as you don't get drunk, as long as it's done in moderation, there's no sin in that, and they would say it can actually be enjoyable. My position is different, and I don't know. Maybe I am too aggressive. Maybe I am too legalistic. But here's how I see it. My main point stems from Proverbs 23:31, which says that we're not even supposed to look at the wine when it has turned red in the cup, when it moves itself aright. And so I believe almost from the outset, when I first read that verse, my immediate thought was this is talking about the fermentation process. If you watch grapes ferment, if you watch wine ferment, the fermentation process moves itself. It doesn't require stirring or anything like that. If you have a glass bottle and you can watch fermentation, the grapes start to come to the top and you start to get a foaming, bubbling in there, and it's moving itself. It's stirring itself. And so I've always thought that that's what that is talking about. In which case there would be two kinds of wine. Because it says not to look at the wine when it's fermented, if that's what is meant by the phrase when it moves itself right. It says not to look at the wine when it's fermented. So that would imply that there is unfermented wine that you can look at. And I just listened to a sermon by John MacArthur where he points out, I read the sermon, I didn't listen to it, I'm sorry, and I read it in a hurry because I was working, but I believe he points out that every time wine is mentioned in the Old Testament in a positive context, it's talking about mixed wine. And what the mixed wine is that the Jews would boil their wine down to get like a jelly type substance that could be stored and preserved and carried. And so during the boiling process, the alcohol would burn off. And so you'd be left with this jelly substance that they would then mix with water. And that's why you would get the mixed wine. And so you would get a strongly diluted non-alcoholic drink. I think he points out that even the alcoholic wine back then was maybe 2%, 2.5% alcohol. And then they would dilute it at least 4 to 7 times with water. So you end up with, like, I don't know what that would be, diluted 4 to 7 times, would probably like 0.5 to 0.1 or to 1%, which I think in America we would classify as a non-alcoholic drink. It would be like a kombucha. And so it's like almost a grape juice. And when they boil it down and get rid of all the alcohol, it really is a grape juice. And so my argument would be, we're not supposed to look at wine when it's fermented. So you can look at it when it's not fermented, when it's just grape juice. And grape juice rejoices the heart. And people be like, oh, why would juice rejoice your heart? It's the alcohol that rejoices the heart. Now, that's nonsense. If you're walking around spending your life drinking dirty water and goat's milk, a glass of grape juice is going to be extremely pleasurable. It's going to be a good day to get that grape juice. So my main argument is based on Proverbs 23:31. Now, I did, after having an argument with several of my brothers, I went and looked up commentaries on that, and I was hard-pressed to find anybody that agreed with my interpretation. So that kind of caused me to doubt my position a little bit, at least on that verse, because if I'm the only one coming up with that interpretation, then I'm obviously wrong. I think I read Matthew Henry, I read Spurgeon on it, I read a few other commentaries, maybe Gill's commentary or something like that. And they all take it to mean something else. They take it to mean when it's shiny, or when it looks good, or when it's smooth. So they have a different outlook on that. So after reading that and finding that really there's not anybody I found, I didn't look hard, so maybe there are people out there, but there's not. The ones I looked at, there wasn't anybody that agreed with how I'm reading Proverbs 23:31. So perhaps I'm wrong on that. In which case, that really does injure my main position, because that's where I really hang my hat, is on that verse. My second major point would be that, yes, drunkenness is very clearly defined as sinful. No drunkard will inherit the kingdom of heaven. We're told to be sober-minded. So and over and over the scriptures talk about being sober, and I don't think it's just talking about alcoholic sober. It's talking about just being sober-minded, clear-headed, which intoxication would ruin that. Intoxication in any form, drug or alcohol. So to be drunk is to be no longer sober-minded. However, the word drunk is not defined in Scripture in any particular way. It doesn't say after 4 drinks you're drunk, or after a body buzz you're drunk. It doesn't say that. It just says drunkenness is a sin. Now, today in our society, we define drunk as inebriated or out of control. We define drunk legally as 0.08 or more on the breathalyzer test. But just because that's how we define it in our current society, that doesn't mean you can't equate that to the biblical definition of drunkenness. You can't just say, because we say this is what drunkenness is, this is what biblical drunkenness is. We don't know that. And so you're running this risk, in my opinion. Drunkenness could be the moment you get that body buzz, the moment you start to feel a little lightheaded, which to somebody who doesn't drink a lot, 1 or 2 beers or 1 or 2 shots can certainly cause that feeling, can cause that lightheadedness, which would mean you're no longer sober-minded, and I think that would mean that you're drunk. So with such a loose definition of drunk, without knowing where the lines are, it's like walking down a path with a sign at the beginning of the path that says cliff ahead, but it doesn't tell you where the cliff is, and you're in the dark and blind. It is foolish, in my opinion, to take any steps on that path. Why would you even start down it? Don't go down that path. You don't know where the cliff is. You're sitting there having a good time, having a drink or two, and next moment, you go from just being completely fine to all of a sudden you're that lightheaded. You got that body buzz going on. Have you just now sinned? You've just now crossed it with that one drink. Took you from what you thought was tolerable to now you're in sin. So, and you don't know when that's going to occur. It's based on body weight and tolerance and all these other things. So why would you even go down that line? What if one alcoholic drink and you get that initial body rush? What if that's drunkenness? Because again, the alcohol today, even in the slightest form, like a beer, it runs 3.7 to 5.5, 6.5% alcohol. So you figure an average beer, 4.5%. That's twice the alcohol content of undiluted wine. Back in the old days, the unmixed wine, the pure wine back in the day was 2.25% alcohol. And again, the Jews would dilute it with 4 to 7 parts water to make it even less, or they would boil it down to that jelly form, in which case there's no alcohol content. So you're taking a beer, which now, one beer is like 7 times stronger, 7 to 14 times stronger than what they had in the Old Testament days to drink. So that one alcoholic beer, and MacArthur talked about this in a sermon. It was, 1,000 years after Christ, they came up with a new fermentation process that increased the alcohol content. And then during the years of Napoleon, they came up with another aspect to even more increase the alcohol content, to now where you can get, 70% alcohol in some of those strong drinks, 100 proof, 120 proof alcoholic drinks or whatever it is. But so, like I say, even in the minutest form, even in just one beer, you're dealing with something that's potentially 7 to 14 times stronger than what they had in the Old Testament. One beer can give you a body buzz. One beer can give you that lightheadedness, in which case you are no longer sober-minded and you have stepped into the realm of sin. So again, why even take that step? My third point would be that the Levitical priesthood was not allowed to drink wine when entering the temple. So the question becomes, why not? Why weren't they allowed to drink wine before stepping into the temple? And I think the idea there is that the temple was holy and they needed to be holy. Therefore, it's inferred that drinking wine is an unholy or at least an unclean act. And yes, I understand that they did things in the Levitical times. They did things back then that were no longer required to obey, like they couldn't eat shellfish or bacon. And Jesus has opened that door to us. He said, whatever he's made clean is clean. We can eat whatever we want. Jesus didn't address the regulations of the and the specific thing with the temple had to do with holiness. The priests had to be holy. They couldn't be unclean. If they had touched a dead body, they couldn't go in there. If they had, there was all sorts of things that would make them less than pure. And apparently drinking wine is something like that. Same with the Nazarene oath. The Nazarenes would take that oath that they would never drink wine. John the Baptist never drank wine. Why? It was for a standard of holiness, to show themselves distinct and separate, holy. And we are to be a holy and peculiar people, separate from society. So why would we want to do something that even society deems as taboo? They won't allow children to drink. If it's a considered an unclean heathenist type activity. So why would we do that if we're supposed to be holy, special people? Why do we even want to act like the world? Which leads me into my next point. Why do Christians drink alcohol? And some people say, oh, they like the taste of it. And I'm not buying that. The taste of beer is not a pleasant taste. It's bitter. There's 100 things that taste better than beer. I've never had a glass of wine, so I don't know what wine tastes like. But my point is that I seriously doubt that people are truly doing it for taste. I think people are doing it for the feel. They want the buzz, which means that it is drunkenness they're seeking. And they're trying to get as close to that line as possible without crossing it. Now, that's a motive issue, as one of my brothers pointed out to me, and I can't judge a person's motive. I'm just saying from my own perspective, from what I'm seeing, and yeah, you'd have to test your own heart there. Why are you drinking? Is it to catch that buzz? Because then you're in sin. And then my next point would be that, what does society think of a Christian who drinks? Is it not a stumbling block? Does it not give them room to mock and blaspheme in the name of the Lord? As soon as a solid born-again Christian takes an alcoholic drink in their hand in front of a lost person, what's the first words out of that lost person's mouth? Oh, I thought you were a Christian. Isn't that sinful? And yes, there's other things like that too, that smoking and gambling. But we don't really have scriptures addressing smoking and gambling and whatnot. So I would say that this drinking is in a different category because of all the previous points I've made. This just adds validity to the point I'm trying to make, that the lost world sees this as a taboo activity, and they would mock Christ, and they would ridicule you as a Christian for having a drink. In that same breath, there are many Christians like myself who view alcohol as a sin. Even if you have, with all these points I've made, even if you're still saying, no, I have the liberty to drink, you're wrong on Proverbs 23, you're wrong about being drunk, you're wrong about the holiness aspect, you're wrong about the stumbling block, I can just do it in private. So even if you consider all that, there's Christians like myself that consider it sinful. So if you think you have Christian liberty in this, what do the scriptures tell us you're supposed to do? Paul said that if meat causes his brother to stumble, he won't ever eat meat. And so if this is a stumbling block, and it is not just for me, I'm gonna get into that later, but I don't think I would separate from a brother for having a drink now and then. But put a asterisk on that. I'm going to come back to that. I think it would cause many brothers and sisters to stumble. It would cause them to see you as lost. It would cause them to, you're causing them to stumble, because then they're judging another man's servant in their hearts, because, especially like a new believer or an immature believer, when they see somebody drinking. So we've got all these different aspects here. I'm trying to think if I had any more. I think that just about covers the reasons why I think drinking is a sin and shouldn't be done by a Christian. Now, my brothers and sisters disagreed with me and argued with me vehemently, which really led into my next point here. I was so grieved by it, especially because one particular brother who had stood by my side on this topic was all of a sudden wavering. And, I was grieved by that. I was kind of taken aback and shocked by it. And so I tried hard to persuade him. I tried to show him all these points. But it really grieved me, and it caused me to stand back from my group and really feel isolated. And I'm talking about my small group of fellowship. And it caused me to feel isolated and distant and separate from them. And for a while there, I was really examining myself, going, do I really have anything in common with these brothers and sisters anymore outside of, yes, we have the commonality of the gospel, but there's so many distinctions and differences and dividers between us on other issues that can I continue to walk with them? Is this healthy to continue to walk with them? And so what my thoughts were on that is based on Amos 3:3, which says, "Can two walk together unless they be agreed?" And in my walk of faith, I've come to learn that when you have commonality with brothers and sisters, when you have a common understanding, when we come to one mind, as the scriptures say, we're supposed to be of one mind. When you have that one-mindedness on different issues of the scriptures, on different doctrines, on different understanding in theology, when you're of the same mind, it builds such a great intimacy, a beautiful intimacy, a closeness, a union with them that makes you cleave to them and be one with them, and it brings you together so close. Now, contrawise, every distinction in doctrine, every disagreement in the scriptures causes disunity, causes a lack of one-mindedness, and it makes you feel separate from them. It makes that intimacy is hindered. There's a barb put there, and which is why we defend and we wrestle and we argue for our points, because we want that intimacy. We want people to be of the same mind. We want to come to the truth. I don't want to be in disagreement with my brothers. I want to be of the same mind with them. And so I started thinking, like, when we're saved, we're put onto the narrow path. And that narrow path is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the pure gospel of Jesus Christ. When we get that right, we're family. When we're in Christ, we're on that narrow path. We're together. We're walking together. We're in unity. Now, as we walk down that path, we come to many manifold decisions on scriptures. We come to different interpretations, different thoughts. And each time there's a disagreement, there's a step placed between us. We're no longer walking side by side, arm in arm. We come to, like, let's say the issue of Calvinism versus Arminianism. If one of my brothers decides that he's going to believe in free will, Arminian decisionalism, but perhaps, and I think there's levels of that too. Maybe it's just out of ignorance or a lack of study. It puts a small step between us. If he goes full-blown Pelagianism, it puts, a great distance between us. But let's say he just goes that little one step. We're now one step apart from each other. We still feel pretty, if you're walking by a person and they're just one step behind you or one step ahead of you, you still feel pretty unified with them. You're still together. You're still in conversation. Nothing, there's not a lot lost. So we're still able to do fellowship. Now you're continuing on and you come to another issue, let's say eschatology, and there's a disagreement there. Now there's another step. Now you got two steps between us. It starts to feel a little awkward. You start to wonder about this step. You start to, have to look over your shoulder to talk to them, or talk a little bit louder, and there's just that little bit of distance. Now you come to another decision, another issue on the scriptures. Let's say, there's another disagreement. Now there's a third step, and then you go further, and there's another disagreement, a fourth step. Pretty soon you guys are pretty far apart. And it's hard to maintain communication. It's hard to maintain fellowship. And so that's kind of how I was feeling on this. I felt like just lately within my group, there's been so many doctrinal disagreements, whereas once I felt like we were unified and I felt like we were just together. I felt like we were on the same page on most issues. And that's great. Like I say, you get that intimacy. And when there is disunity, I have a hard time taking my focus off of that. Like when somebody takes a step away, I'm focusing on that step because I'm wanting them to come back. I'm wanting that step to be closed. I want that gap to be closed. And so it's really, really hard for me to take my eyes off of the gap. I'm focused on the gap. Let's close the gap. Let's fix this. Let's get back to that arm in arm unity. I want that. I desire that. And so, like I say, these differences, and the one with alcohol, I especially, I felt outnumbered. I felt ganged up on. I felt disrespected, which is selfish pride. Like I felt like, and well, it's just prideful, but I just felt like I was losing ground with my brothers, and especially with some of my brothers that had been arm in arm with me. All of a sudden, there's a step between us, and I'm looking at it, going, "Man, I just don't want this. We gotta fix this, man. I need you back here with me." And if I'm wrong, like I say, I don't see it. I would rather it if this is if this is a gray area, there's danger in gray areas. And why would I not lean towards the side of less danger? Why would I not lean towards the side of abstinence, or like they called in the old days, teetotalism, and staying away from alcohol? Why wouldn't I lean towards that way? With all these other, because the brothers are going to point out, well, wine rejoices the heart, and I'm going to say, well, yeah, but that's just talking about the unfermented wine. It's talking about the mixed, diluted, at most 0.5%, probably non-alcoholic wine that they had in the Old Testament. And they're going to say, well, Jesus made wine, and I'm going to say, well, Jesus didn't drink wine, and we don't know what that wine was. Again, it could be that mixed, diluted, non-alcoholic wine. People are going to say, what about Timothy? Well, Timothy took it for medical purposes. It was medicine. It's like taking Dayquil or NyQuil, which has alcoholic content, which I wouldn't argue with. If you're sick and that's the means of remedy, I wouldn't argue against that. I think that's the one time it's justifiable. If you're sick, it talks about giving strong drink to those that are dying. I think that's like morphine to a person in a hospital. I couldn't argue against it. I don't think that's wrong. I think for when it's used for medical purposes, Timothy had something wrong with his stomach, and wine helped. And MacArthur points out that when they were drinking nasty, dirty water, adding that little bit of mixed wine in with it would purify the water. And so it would help the stomach ailments. That makes sense. That's tolerable. If you're sick with a cold, I'm not going to argue against you taking a cup of Dayquil, because your motive is, I'm doing this for medical health reasons. Your motive is not to catch a buzz, not to alter that sober-minded state that we're supposed to have as Christians. So yeah, that difference. And that sober-minded thing, that reminded me of another thing I've thought of that I want to get in here before the break. The scriptures say that we're supposed to be filled with the Spirit, not drunk with wine. And I've always been curious about why that analogy was used. Why was that comparison made? To be filled with the Spirit being compared to being drunk with the wine. And I think it's because both give you that joyful experience, that exuberance, that joy. But one is fabricated, one is earthly, one is fleshly, one is false, and that would be the alcohol. One is good and godly and wholesome and holy, and that would be the Spirit. And so we're supposed to be filled with the Spirit, not drunk with wine. And when you think about being filled with the Spirit, it immediately leads me to think of the fruit of the Spirit, because that's what's going to come out of being filled with the Spirit. Fruit, the love, the joy, the peace. Well, what is alcohol? Alcohol is fermented fruit, dying fruit, decaying fruit, poisoned fruit, fermented fruit. That's what causes the intoxication. So instead of having natural, good, wholesome fruit, on the one hand and being filled with the Spirit, you're getting the dead, dying, decaying, fermented fruit that produces an intoxicated counterfeit. And we're on the break here, so we'll pick up that thought on the other end. All right, welcome back to the Weekly Walk. We were talking about alcohol and the Christian prior to the break there. And I really wish I didn't have to cut these off at 30 minutes because I was kind of in a flow there and I lost my train of thought. But I was talking about how these distinctions, this latest disagreement here with my brothers and sisters, has put a level of distance between us. And it's just kind of like I was describing in my analogy about the steps between us. For a lot of my brothers and sisters, there's already 4 or 5 steps between us, and like one more is detrimental to me. It's painful, and so then I started thinking about our fellowship together, and I think a lot of these differences have hindered our fellowship because we can't communicate with each other on spiritual levels. We can't bring ideas and theology and doctrines like we're supposed to, because we all in our hearts are going, I already know what they believe about this and I'm in disagreement with them, so why even talk about it? And so there's so many of these disagreements that we really just kind of dismiss each other. When we're talking to each other, you can discern that it's almost going in one ear and out the other, because everybody's already made up their mind on the topic, and they know where you stand, and they're not going to agree with you, and that's that. And so there's, as my brother was pointing out, it was just a lack of teachability. And I recognize that in myself. That's one of my key struggles is with pride, but it's in the others too. And it's hindered fellowship. It's made it so that we get together and we'll try to force some scriptures, and we'll talk a few spiritual things, and then we'll just go into joking around and playing games. And then at some point we'll try to work in some more spiritual things, or we'll talk about the world and its current situation, the politics and the end time signs perhaps. And we talk about pipe dreams that we have of starting businesses and building a community and all these other things, but the spiritual lack is evident. And it's because of all these disagreements. Well, one of the reasons is because of all these disagreements. We know we're in disagreement on things, and so it's hard to approach the subject. It's hard to even address these issues. And so when another issue of disagreement comes up, it's just heartbreaking, and it's hard to deal with. So that led me into the idea of, well, what do we do? Not only is there a distance between us because of disagreements, but some of these things, at least from my point of view, I view as sinful. Like I'm saying with the alcohol. And after, I went camping this weekend with a few of my brothers and sisters, and we had this conversation, and we kind of hashed things out, and it ended up being really beneficial for me. It kind of eased my mind a little bit, as far as, letting me see that they're coming at it from a scriptural respect as well. And so I have to allow room for the possibility that I could be wrong on this. And that's hard to admit, because like I say, when it's an issue of sin, I don't want to be in error. I have enough sin in my life. I don't want to add another one because of ignorance. I don't want to say, well, I suppose this is a gray area, maybe it ain't sin, and all of a sudden, I'm falling into some nonsense. I don't want that. I want to be on guard, and I don't want to be legalistic about being on guard. But there's so many things that I don't want to give up ground to the world. I don't want to. I'm fighting to keep the ground that I have, so I don't want to. And like I say, it's better to err on the side of caution. So it's really hard to say I could be wrong when this issue is a potential sinful thing. And in my mind right now, I'm 99% persuaded that it is sinful to do. And so with that in mind, it's like, okay, if a brother is in sin, how do you react to that? Like, yes, if they're struggling with a sin, they've confessed that, hey, this is a problem for me and I'm struggling and I'm wrestling against it. That's fine. All right, that's good. I'll walk with you. I'll bear this burden with you. I'll come with you on this journey. I know you're struggling against it. I know you're fighting against it. I know you recognize it as sin. So you're on the right path. You're okay with me. There's no separation needed. But when a brother denies that it is sin, how can there be repentance then? There's persistent, continual sin, and they're justifying their action. And so, like, people are like, well, it's because there's all these gray areas. You can't call drinking alcohol sinful. Well, in my book, it is. You might not be able to say it is, but I say it is. So I'm seeing it as sin. I'm seeing my brother's sin. How's that any different than if I were to see him cheating on his wife? Or how is that any different than if I were to see him, committing fraud and saying, guys, don't worry, it's not a sin. There's nothing wrong here, And so one of my brothers tried to make the argument that because there's seemingly contradictory scriptures, that it's not a crystal clear issue, that makes the difference. But like I say, on my end, what if it is a crystal clear issue? What if I am fully persuaded? Just because you're not fully persuaded, that doesn't change the facts. And like I say, I'm 99%, so I can't say I'm fully persuaded. But in my eyes, it is a sinful, foolish, at the very least, it is a foolish, worldly, non-beneficial activity that can cause people to stumble, and that will cause the lost world to look unfavorably and mockingly at us. Therefore, it ought to be avoided. In addition, we don't really know where drunk starts, and we're supposed to be sober-minded. So again, if you see the sign, there's a cliff ahead and it's pitch black dark, why even take a step that way? You don't know where. And you could just all of a sudden be falling off the edge. And the idea that if you really study out what wine is in the Old Testament, you're going to find that it's nowhere near what even a beer is today. It's just diluted and like 1/7 of the alcohol content. So there's all these points to be made. And, if you're not fully persuaded, I don't know what to do in that situation. It's like, well, at what point, if you think a brother is in sin, and I know that people are pointing out the Romans 14 issue, there's liberty here. We got to be gracious. But we're also supposed to separate from a brother in sin who won't receive rebuke, and I don't know if this is one of those issues. I don't know where the line in the sand is. I'm just so uncertain about it. One thing I was thinking about is the scriptures talk about how there's a sin unto death and a sin that's not unto death. And I definitely think that as long as a brother is not passing into drunkenness, which again is so hard to define, like where is that drunken line? That's what makes this difficult for me. But if a brother has a beer or a glass of wine, to me that is sinful, but perhaps it's not the sin unto death, in which case it says I'm supposed to pray for the brother. And I would assume, okay, can fellowship continue here? I would, and that brings me back to the separation issue. Would you separate from a brother? I don't know. But if I'm sitting around and all of a sudden a brother breaks out a beer, I'm going to have a really hard time staying there. Like, how can I sit and watch this brother do something that I think is sinful? To me, it would be like, what if I was just stealing money? Are those brothers just supposed to sit there and watch? And from my perspective, sin is sin. So the sin of alcohol is in the same vein. as stealing. I don't see the difference. And I know brothers would say, well, there is a difference because you can't prove, but it's proven to me to beyond a reasonable doubt at least. So there's just this difficulty of like, man, I don't think I could be around a brother drinking. It would just grieve me. I'm not saying I would separate from them totally, but if they open a beer, I gotta leave. I gotta plead with them. Please don't do this. And it's, I don't know, it's just a rough situation. It's there's so many different areas here to look into, and I guess the bottom line is I was thinking like, what do I do with a brother that I think is in sin, but he doesn't think he's in sin? Taking into account Romans 14 with the Christian liberty, taking into account a sin that's not unto death, taking all these things into account, what is my reaction? Do I just weep for the brother? Do I just pray for the brother? I don't know. It's, do I just, I think do I just say, screw it, let every man do what they want? Like, am I my brother's keeper? That kind of thing. Tie that in with, we each answer to God ourselves. I'm nobody's master. I can't command and demand things. So you tie all that in, and it's like, man, just how I'm just trying to figure out how to do fellowship in the light of these things. It's there's been a step put between us that creates disunity, and I'm having a really hard time not looking at the step. There's something you're doing that I think is sinful, which causes me to be grieved. So there's all these different aspects, and I'm not sure how to handle it. But yeah, so that's my point. I would not drink alcohol. I think there's too much danger in not knowing where you go from being sober minded to a state of drunkenness. I think there's way too much danger. I think the alcohol today is far too potent, far too strong, and one drink can put you into a non-sober minded state, regardless of what we define as inebriated or legally drunk. You blow that breathalyzer at a .08, and they say you're legally drunk. While .06, are you biblically drunk? .04, are you biblically drunk? Once the mind starts to get a little bit altered, you're not thinking straight. You're in a different state of mind. So I guess the bottom line to me is I would not drink. It's not. I wouldn't say that a brother who drinks is not a brother. That's certainly not the case. But I would say that they're causing others to stumble, and they're acting foolishly and not being wise and playing with fire. And it's a worldly activity. It's an unnecessary thing. If a brother wants to go Old Testament to get that wine that rejoices the heart and drink some unfermented wine, or the mixed wine that MacArthur talked about, or the strongly diluted, homemade 0.05%, basically kombucha style grape juice, I probably wouldn't be able to say anything to that. I would still be a little, like I say, I'm still uncomfortable with the idea of alcohol. It's fermented fruit. It's poisoned, dying fruit, which to me just is the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit. So, I don't know. But I got brothers that drink kombucha juice, and I don't go away from them when they do it. But it does prick me. It does, grieve me. I see it, and I'm like, man, there's so many alternatives that are less risky. There's so many alternatives that don't have alcohol content. So, and, lest you think I'm the hypocrite, I've lived a past life of drunkenness. before getting saved. That's where I was. That's where I hung my hat, in that partying atmosphere. And since being saved, I've fallen into that sin. I hate using the word fallen, because I didn't fall. I chose to go that direction. After some heartbreak, I made some foolish decisions. But it's not something that I think is okay to do. And I wouldn't go down. I don't drink. I'm not gonna drink, Lord willing. And it's just because you have to be careful if you think you stand, lest you fall. But I'm even grieved when at the Lord's Supper they serve alcoholic wine. It's like, that's unnecessary. There's alternatives that don't contain alcohol. Just why play with fire? Why go down that path? But anyways, so that's really been dominating my thoughts here. And like I say, I got a lot of peace talking to a couple of my brothers over the campfire. We had a great camping trip, first camping trip of the year. It was a bit cold the first 2 nights, probably dropped down to high 30s. So it was really, really cold sleeping in that tent the first 2 nights. But we had a great time, great fellowship. I had some good conversations. Like I say, they brought a lot of peace, because coming into that camping trip, I was dogmatically opposed to the idea of anybody thinking they had the freedom to drink, and I was ready to separate from fellowship because of it. And they kind of eased my mind a little bit, and made me think along the lines of grace and mercy and love and fellowship, and just loving my brothers, and letting them come to their own conclusions. They answer to their own master. I've tried my hardest to persuade them of my position, but now it's between them and God, and they've got to work out their own motives for why they're even thinking about doing this. But like I say, I would just, if any of them, out of respect, to not be a stumbling block to me, I would hope that they would never drink in front of me, that they wouldn't advocate for it in my presence, or that they would just, anything that we think we have liberty in, it's supposed to be done privately, and so I don't know. It's just I know I have a tendency to be very dogmatic and blunt, and just very straightforward. There is no gray for me. Everything is black and white. There's a truth and there's not a truth, and that's it. Anything that's in a gray area is not correct. It's an error. There's one right answer for every math problem. There's one answer, and there's one right, and a multitude of different ways to be wrong, but there's just one right, one truth. And so that's the position I take, and I feel like it's not even worth talking about something if you haven't made up your mind on an issue. So I look at issues and I come to a determination of what I believe to be right. And once I make that determination, I'm sticking to it. I'm going wholeheartedly. If I find out later that I was wrong, there's grievous repentance, and I got to turn and figure out what the right way to go is. But I'm gonna take a solid black and white position on almost every topic. It's just the way I think. It's the way I function. I like I say, I don't believe in gray areas, and if I haven't made a decision on something, I'm teetering between two positions, and that's unacceptable for me. I gotta make a call. Either alcohol is okay or it's not. There's no middle ground for me. And so, like I say, I don't believe that a Christian, with all the evidence that I laid out, is permitted to drink alcohol. Or at the very least, it's not a wise, beneficial decision to do so. All right, so one other thing I just want to update. A couple of podcasts back, I told you I'd come up with this prayer acronym to help me in my prayer closet, and it was just PRAY, which stood for Praise, Request, Admit, and Yield. in which I enter into the prayer closet with praise on my lips, praising God for his character, praising him for who he is and what he's done. The magnificence of his creation is where my mind often goes in those praise moments. And then our request, I bring my petitions to him. I bring the desires of my heart to him. I let him know, which, he already knows, but you're vocalizing it in the spirit. The things that I desire, the things that I hope for and long for. And then A is admit. I admit my sins and my failures and my twistings and perversions and the things in my heart and mind where I've gone astray, and just confess these things to him and beg for his help to overcome and to not do them again. And then Y is yield. I yield to his will, whatever he wants. If my requests go against his plan and purpose for my life, then so be it. Then I want his will. He knows what he's doing. I don't. So I yield to him. But then as I was thinking, I started thinking about some things that were missing from that prayer. And so I've changed the acronym from pray to prayers. I added an E.R.S to the end, based on some additional ideas for prayer that I had. The E stands for everyone, or everyone else. I recognized that I wasn't praying for my brothers and sisters in the faith. There's many times people make prayer requests where there's things you recognize that need to be prayed for. And so I thought, man, I need to add that. I need to be praying for, one brother's particularly been on my heart for a particular issue. And so I've been focused on that. I want to remember to bring my brothers and sisters before the Lord. So I added the E for everyone else. And then the R stood for rejoice, I think. Man, what did the R stand for? It's rejoice. To rejoice in the things the Lord has done for me, which is different from praise. Like I've really been thinking about the distinction between praise and rejoicing. The praise is to praise him for who he is and what he's done. The rejoicing is to thank him for what he's done for me and what he's given to me. So the praise is more about his character. The rejoicing is more about his interactions with me specifically. So I'll rejoice in the car that he's given me, and the warm clothes, and the job, and the paycheck, and the ministry opportunities, and just rejoicing for all the different good things that he's done for me. And then finally, the S is scripture, because we're supposed to meditate on the scriptures or pray the scriptures. So I've been trying to take like one verse and just really think it through, and just in the spirit there, just praise him and think these things through. But to be honest, I haven't really had a good success rate in putting this into action every day. I had a brief period there where I was super motivated to get into my prayer closet every morning, and then I got lazy, and because I wake up at 4 a.m. to go to the gym before work, and then I get home and I don't have to work till 8, and so I thought, man, what a great time to be in the prayer closet. But lately I've been getting home and it's like, man, I got 2 hours here. Still pretty tired. I could go back to sleep, and so I've lazily fallen into that habit instead of getting into the prayer closet. And then after work, I really just haven't had a lot of time either, just because I like to do these so-called ministry things, or small ministry things. They're ministry things that I do from the comfort of my home and my computer. I do some teaching videos and on YouTube, and this podcast, and some watch-alongs with some documentaries and stuff like that. So I like to do those after work, and then usually right around this time, 7:30, 8 o'clock, I'm trying to get into bed, so I can get up at 4 again to go to the gym. But so that's my new acronym, is the prayers. It's praise, request, admit, yield, Everyone else, rejoice, and scriptures, prayers. And I just love how the Lord has given this to me, because it's such an easy way for me to remember. This acronym is perfect for me. Pray, I thought was great. I was like, yes, I got pray. And then when I realized I was missing some things, I was like, oh man. And then I realized, oh, I can make this prayers. That's great. This works fantastic. So it's just been a blessing for me, and hopefully I can continue on, and the Lord will really just motivate me to get into that prayer closet more often. Especially because I realize I got so many brothers and sisters that need prayers. So, I guess that's what I got for you guys tonight. As always, I really appreciate you listening. It means the world to me, and I love you guys, and we'll talk to you later.